Hello, hello. Very nice to
Добрий.
see. Добрий вечір. Добрий wieczór.
Dobry
To
wieczór, kłaniam się.
Witam
Zdaje się, że za wcześnie jesteśmy.
Witam serdecznie. Пані Ірино, вітаю. Вітаю сердечно.
Приємно, дякую.
Щиро тішуся вас бачити. So we have 2 minutes and we will start our final session for today, which I believe will be as insightful and will provide good food for thought as the previous 2 sessions. So
The previous sessions is very successful, seems to me.
it was a very good conversation. Yes.
Mhm.
And you were part of it, Professor.
Yeah.
So thank you for your insights. Yes, we are still welcome to oh yes, so now Professor Fínnin, a pleasure to welcome you. Professor Седмак, Professor Хоґґан-Клоуберт, we will start we're still waiting for Clemens. Yes, and we still have 1 minute. Before we will continue with oh yes, Professor Clemens is joining. Yes. Yes, yes. So dear colleagues, dear friends, thank you very much for joining this again final panel of today's conference day. We had good, insightful discussions before. I'm sure we'll continue this dynamic. And within this panel, we will try to see what is influencing on shaping tomorrow's society during the wartime. It's a challenging time. It's a difficult time, and not all factors are. We are going through different phases. We are experiencing different things. We have ups and downs in this process. But in a conversation with all military, they always point out that if we wouldn't think about tomorrow of our children, our families, our country, we wouldn't find today. So what are those factors? What we need to keep in mind? What is important to remember today? Those are the issues that we will discuss with the outstanding participants of this panel, and I have an immense pleasure to present the speakers of this conversation. Professor Rorі Фіннін, Professor of Ukrainian Studies at the University of Cambridge and a fellow of Robinson College of Cambridge. Professor Fínnin, thank you for joining this conversation. Tetyana Хоґґан-Клоуберт, Professor at the chair of Chair of Adult and Continuing Education at University of Augsburg, Germany, and researcher on issues of migration and civic education in Eastern and Western Europe and the United States. Professor Hoґґan-Клоуберт, thank you for joining this conversation. Professor Ірина Старовойт, poet, translator, literary scholar, the associate professor at the Department of Cultural Studies at OKU. Pani Irino, an immense pleasure to welcome you. And Professor Клеменс Седмак, director of the Nanovic Institute of European Studies at the Keough School of Global Affairs, University of Notr-Dam, USA, and a big friend of OKU. Professor Седмак, an immense pleasure to welcome you.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Yes, and we will continue with introductory notes from all our speakers, and I believe we will have some time for discussion afterwards. And my first invitation will go to Professor Rorі Фіннін. Professor Fіннін, you launched the Ukrainian studies at Cambridge in 2008. It's a long time and big experience and in time of crucial changes. And your insights at this time are very valuable. The floor is yours.
По-перше, я хотів би сказати українською мовою добрий вечір, шановні колеги, і для мене дуже велика честь брати участь у цій конференції сьогодні. So nice to see you all. Pani Oksana, thank you so much for the kind introduction. It's really a great pleasure to be on this panel with such wonderful colleagues, and I hope you don't mind. I thought last night that it might be nice to share some slides, and I was inspired, in fact, by some images that I saw from friends also online that were inspired by the birthday of Taras Shevchenko. And recently in Notre-Dame, in fact, thanks to the generosity and the hospitality of Professor Седмак and his team at the Nanovic Institute, and with the wonderful company of Volodymyr Turchanovsky and others, I was able to talk a little bit about Taras Shevchenko. So I thought today what we could do is explore a few slides together, and I would love to show them to you. So let me just see if I can share my screen here.
Yes, I believe that, yeah, you have...
Like I can, yeah? Let's see.
Yes, we see.
Great. Oh, wonderful. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, okay. This short presentation is really, I think, just a response to our current geopolitical moment. So, Pani Oksana, you mentioned how difficult this time is. And I want to take a step back and then zoom in turn on this question of Ukraine's resilience, this question of resilience, the overuse of the term resilience. But what I really want to do is address the geopolitical circumstances that have so many political leaders, different groups and audiences around the world speaking in very empty and ignorant terms about peace talks, for instance, that are negotiated in Washington and Moscow without concern for or knowledge of the hundreds and thousands of Ukrainian citizens living under very brutal Russian aggression. And I think a lot of this discourse comes from a broader tendency in a great deal of Western scholarship about Ukraine that is highly territorialist, to use a term. And what I mean by that is there is a kind of geographical sense that has enveloped so much of our thinking about Ukraine. And that geopolitical sense and geographical sense is, it involves us thinking in terms of the static rather than the fluid. So if one looks at entire corpus of social science about Ukraine produced in the West, we'll often see various sociological polls whose findings are organized into columns by region or rows by language or ethnicity, with little clarity as to how the percentages in these boxes refer to actual people, to individuals in the fullest sense. And that's why I'm very inspired by your focus on integral human development. Obviously, people move between these different columns, these different entries that we place on spreadsheets and sociological polls. And I think I remember, particularly after 2014, when the Annexation of Crimea took place. The war in the Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts was waged by Russian irregular and regular forces. How often in the West we saw these color-coded maps on TV screens dividing Ukraine between a so-called Russian-speaking East and a Ukrainian-speaking West. This is a broader epistemological problem, which really saw the elevation of the two dimensions of the map, or the spreadsheet, or the typologies, that came at the expense of an understanding of the manifold dimensions of the human subject. So my modest objective today is to break down some of these narrative frames, to rip open our mental maps, and share, just for discussion, a number of underground movements under Russian occupation in Ukraine today, partisan groups that will be known to many in Ukraine. So if I'm repeating material, I'm sorry for that. But for those that may not know about these groups, I want to highlight them. I've spoken about some of them at Notre Dame actually in the past, which I'm pleased to say. And these Ukrainians under Russian occupation risk everything to speak a language of solidarity with their compatriots in mainland Ukraine, and of course, with us as well. And I think in our political discourse, we too often hear casual references to the possibility of Ukraine so-called giving up territory. Marco Rubio, the current Secretary of State, used these words very recently, of course, without thinking about what is really meant. And what is really meant here are the ethical stakes of Ukraine giving up on its people, most of whom see their future, their home in Ukraine, in Europe, not in a militarized gray zone that is governed by fear and suspicion. And as we know, Russian occupiers too often seek to eliminate these voices and invest a great deal of resource to insist that they do not exist. So we see this on social media. We even see it in mainstream Western journalistic discourse. But of course, these voices do exist, and they exist in increasingly large numbers. We could talk about, as we did in Notre Dame not too long ago, about the group Atesh, which is a predominantly Crimean Tatar group. The name means fire in the Crimean Tatar language. We could speak of the Krymsky Boyovi Chayki, the so-called Crimean combat seagulls, which take guerrilla action in Ukraine. They increasingly operate in other parts of occupied Ukraine as well. And they follow, map, and geolocate Russian military assets and mount acts very often of sabotage. Some of them are even mobilized into the Russian army with the intention of, quote, destroying it from within. But what I want to do is focus on less kinetic, but no less influential acts of local resistance under occupation. I think these do offer us hope because they restore to our view the voices of those beneath this curtain of Russian occupation. These are so-called information partisan movements. These are warriors of ethics who are active in what Frantz Fanon, who is our greatest scholar of the colonial psychopathology, he describes as, quote, watching over from below, watching over from below. So for Fanon, anti-colonial, anti-occupation resistance involves disrupting what Sartre calls seriality, or what Arendt calls atomization. In other words, the way a regime engenders our passivity and our alienation, our loneliness, by teaching us to remain in our place in the system and never transgressing its boundaries. Arendt writes, so long as you're alone, you're always powerless, however strong you may be. And so in response, Fanon preaches a practice of what he calls vigilance. And you can see this very frequently in places occupied in Ukraine today. And this is a methodology of taking back the built environment, taking back views of the built environment, perspectives of the built environment. It's a methodology of taking this built environment back and marking the spatial material world around us with new modes of political solidarity. So Fanon and Arendt would have really appreciated the Zhovka Strichka or yellow ribbon movement, which by its very name and by virtue of its activities would probably evoke from many the Weiße Rosa, White Rose underground in Germany in World War II, which spread agitational literature decrying the Nazi regime as an evil dictatorship, for instance, and also defaced walls, buildings with similar messages on graffiti, especially in places like Bavaria. So the Yellow Ribbon Movement emerged in Kherson in 2022. As you know, many activists simply adorn trees, fences, posts with different yellow ribbons. Sometimes they spray paint the yellow and blue of the Ukrainian flag. They've done this actually very frequently on sites in Crimea, often spray painting the letter Y. Y is the 13th letter, of course, of the Ukrainian alphabet, but it's much more than a letter, much more than a linguistic unit. It is a sign of Ukrainian identity, originality, and difference, because it's not shared with the Russian language or with any other Slavic language for that matter. Just 2 days ago, the Yellow Ribbon Movement conducted a campaign celebrating the birthday of Taras Shevchenko on the 9th of March, of course, with activists posting photos with messages of celebration inside palms, which is a frequent positioning of the hand, often very small letters on small pieces of paper. But they are done in the foreground, and in the background are key sites, town squares, and very often statues, as we'll see. As you know, public celebrations of Shevchenko's birth on the 9th were forbidden in occupied Ukraine. But these kinds of actions that you see here are very much what Fanon means by watching over from below. This is grassroots vigilance in which other Ukrainians see and understand that they are not alone, that there are many who do not abide by the occupier's prohibition, and address even Taras Shevchenko as the Kobzar in a very intimate term, right? So Kobzar meaning the Kobza player, the emblematic title of his 1840 collection of poetry. This is an image from Melitopol in which the lines from Shevchenko's seminal poem Kafkaz are displayed. We talked about Kafkaz recently at Notr-Dame, so Clemens already knows this poem by heart at this point. But this is a really key moment in the poem in which the spirit and this sense of freedom or defiant freedom, volia, is evoked. Ne vmraya dusha nasha, ne vmraya volia. This notion of the soul and defiant freedom, everlasting and eternal. A message of solidarity with Shevchenko in 1845, but also a message, obviously, to those who are under occupation today and those fighting at the front and volunteering to support the entire Ukrainian effort of defense. So what am I getting at? I want to just draw our attention to the way in which culture, literature, is being used as a weapon of fluidity against the petrified, stony world of the occupier. So like Zhovska Strichka, the movement Zla Mavka that I'll talk about in just a moment, frequently embraces and deploys literary messages and literary texts and citations in its activities. Zla Mavka is, of course, difficult to translate. It quite literally means angry nymph, but this is a reference to the creature of Ukrainian folklore. And as we know, a Mavka is a beautiful, long-haired siren, often with a garland of flowers in her hair, who lures men into the forest to their death. The Zla Mavka movement takes special aim here at the colonial occupier's world of signification. And this is what I just wanted to put out for our consideration in the panel today. This is a world described by Fanon as, quote, a world petrified, a world cocksure of itself, crushing with its stoniness the backbones of those scarred by the whip. So what we see with so many of these images coming from the Zhovka Strichka movement, from Zla Mavka and so many others, are images that feature poetry, feature the flow and the fluidity of language, and using them as weapons against this ossification, this petrification of the colonial occupier. A couple of examples, once again, of course, with a couplet from Kafkaz. And here an activist photographs herself near the monument to the sunken ships in Sevastopol, which was erected in the late imperial period on the 50th anniversary of the siege of Sevastopol during the Crimean War. It's a very strategic positioning of Boretisia Poborete, fight you will prevail, from that key poem Kafkaz, which is actually, as we discussed in Notr-Dame, lines addressed essentially to the Chechen, Circassian, Ingush mountaineers fighting back against Russian aggression, but also obviously intended implicitly for Ukrainians themselves. And these words have become touchstones for the people of Ukraine, especially since the beginning of the Maidan Revolution of 2013-14, the Revolution of Dignity. Everyone, of course, feels them and hears them keenly today. Shevchenko is often used, obviously this week in particular, but elsewhere we see lines from the poems of Lina Kostenko or even from her prose. Lina Kostenko, for those who don't know, is a hero of the so-called Shishtisyatniki movement, the 60 years movement. And this is a piece that is posted by Islamovka activists indoors and outdoors. And I'll try to play this video so you can see that the activist is interested in showing herself or himself posting this piece on a local wall. Okay, so we can see here, I hope you can see that at least, that the activist was pasting Kostenko's line, "Людям не те, що позакладало вуха, людям позакладало душі." It's not our ears that have fallen deaf, it is our souls that have done so. So such actions remind Ukrainians that they are not alone, that bonds of solidarity and expressions of spiritual human connection can flourish even in these local, rather mundane spaces. They are messages that we need to hear today in this terrible era of geopolitical arrogance, particularly in the West. And when we speak of integral human development, for us to look to sources in culture that remind us of the full-fledged personality and profile of the people under occupation today. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Пане професоре, щиро дякую.
Дуже прошу.
Thank you very much. Of course, my first question to you must have been where this research interest of interplay of culture and identity in Ukraine comes from. But for now, I will just thank you very much for speaking the language of solidarity with Ukraine. Thank you. Now I would like to give the floor to Professor Хоґґан-Клоуберт. Dear Pani Professor, your area of interest has been essential for the previous decade, is more essential now, and will be essential in years to come. I'm talking about, of course, migration and about civic education. So please share your ideas about factors that will shape our future, societies of future. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Pani Oksana, for the invitation, also for the presentation that you did for all of us. Thank you all for staying until the last session, until the last panel, and to discuss with that, as Pani Oksana said at the beginning, probably a little bit optimistic vision and to think about tomorrow's society. And when Professor Fínnin was talking about the role of literature in building the society, I will talk from my perspective about the role of education in building society, but also a special, taking a special focus, a special perspective. I will speak about civic education or civic learning more in adulthood, because I think that especially in the time of post-war development, in the time of any kind of post-conflict development, there will be adults who will be most of all in charge of taking the roles of co-creators of their worlds, of their societies, of their communities. And as we all know, democracies are not fallen from heaven. They are built by us, adults, and this building needs to be learned day by day, the whole life. And if we don't learn it, we unlearn how to keep and how to build democracies. And I see Ukrainian society also being facing a challenge of the whole society that needs to learn and relearn. And I probably need also to see or to present my position. I'm a Ukrainian-German researcher who was focused very strong also on the German history, especially after the Second World War, and on this initiative of the so-called re-education initiatives taken by United Kingdom and by US, and also partially by France, to say it very easily, to make Democrats out of Nazi fighters. So to build democracy on the German soil, in principle, with people who supported authoritarian regime for a long period of time. So I see this effort of re-education especially actually useful for Russia. But I'm talking about this, that in principle we need to prepare the re-education policy, practice and programs for Russia already now, as for example UK did or Great Britain did in Second World War, having a kind of a German Educational Reconstruction Initiative, GER, founded in London in 1943 to prepare the German society for the world after the war. So I appeal to my colleagues in different countries to prepare this kind of policy of re-education already now for the Russian society. But today my focus is not on the Russian society. I see the challenges and the need for civic education effort also for Ukraine. And more than that, it's not only a challenge. I see a lot of assets that have already been achieved and done by Ukrainians in their different initiatives that can be connected to, that can be used also when we will speak about the sources of aspiration, the sources of resilience to the renewal perspective after the World War II. So again, I think when we address the learning or the education effort, we will normally we tend to focus on school and to create programs for school, and civic education in school is part of all the educational programs by Ukrainian Ministry of Education. But what I miss in papers and programs, but see in reality, is to foster, to support, and to put focus on the civic learning initiatives for adults. Again, it is on us adults to build the society after the World War, and nobody of us had learned this before in school. So we will need to think how we create opportunities, places, possibilities for civic learning in adulthood. So if I think about very briefly, I have 8 minutes, so I will pack in these 8 minutes a lot of thoughts, probably not developed fully, but I hope to be able to do it in the discussion, some of them. But if I would think about a framework for this lifelong civic learning for democracy in the post-war period. So again, I would focus on the element that process of civic learning is a continuous process. It's a mode of living together, a mode of dealing with each other, a mode of having dialogues, difficult dialogues across the difference, and probably also a mode of participating in co-creation, in deliberation, and also in civic engagement. We will need also to think about the Democrats, the so-called good citizens that we might want to support, that we might want to develop in ourselves or in our dialogues with others. Again, when I'm talking about learning in adulthood, especially in adulthood, I'm not talking about molding a person into a vision. I'm talking about fostering the agency of a person and addressing a person as a co-creator, not as a recipient of any kind of educational vision of someone else. I see the big challenge in this regard. Because again, looking at the historical example of German re-education, the efforts of American policies at the beginning were to mold Germans into certain vision. And as we have seen from the sociological results, how it was received by Germans, it was received with a lot of opposition and actually rejection. Only in addressing people as capable of doing something, capable of deciding, capable of acting and making change. That's where the re-education policy was having some of the achievements and successful stories. So I think that the dangers that we need to know and we need probably to think about in having any kind of visions about educational reconstruction, if you want, it's to, first of all, to respect a person as an agent that can be molded by any external force. And the civic education might have a tendency to go a little bit in this direction, and I would try in my framework for civic learning to warn from that. So, of course, we talk about visions of good citizens, and there are a lot of different models. What kind of citizens do we learn? Do we need? What kind of capacities, skills do we need to foster, to encourage through our different kind of civic initiatives? And I just take one of tons of typologies. The typology is the drawing of Westheimer and Kahnes, actually a Canadian sociologist and educational scientist, who said we need actually all kinds of citizens. We will need personal responsible citizens who will understand the importance of obeying laws, of contributing to society through gathering garbage in the street. But we will also need participatory citizens who take proactive steps to build community, to address community challenge through leadership, to organize big collective action, to learn how to act together as a group. And of course, we will need also the third layer, the so-called justice-oriented citizens, who critically interrogate system injustice and work towards big transformative social change that will be needed in principle in any kind of upheaval situation. Again, all this kind of learning that I'm talking about, this is not a learning that I see happening in formal classrooms. I see it especially learning beyond formal classrooms, learning in different venues of civic spaces like workplace, participatory budgeting, counseling, participation in social movements, and also a strong participation in third sector. And that's where I see the biggest effort of Ukrainian society, a variety of volunteer organizations, community groups, and other entities that provided since, actually since 2004, since Orange Revolution and through the whole Revolution of Dignity, provide opportunities and also experience of learning civically. And I think my time is unfortunately over, but let me just put two final sentences into this, where I also, in terms of what I see, one of the biggest challenge of civic learning in adulthood in the post-war period, I see it more and more in learn how to live together across the difference, because Ukrainian society was diverse before the war, and it will be even more diverse after the war. We will have groups of people with totally different experiences and with totally different painful experience, who will need to find a mode to talk with each other, to have a dialogue, to create a spirit of collaboration and mutual deliberation without focusing on exclusionary settings of I suffered, you not, I have that experience, you not. And war created a lot of different kinds of sufferings, and we will need to find a mode to acknowledge them, and despite all of that, to create civic dialogues in the society too, that we need to develop together. Thank you very much, and I hope I didn't talk too much of the time, and I'm looking forward to the discussion after that.
Thank you. Thank you, Pani Professor. Applause. Thank you very much. Yes, there are a lot of divisions that we're facing now and more to come, but the recent experience shows that most democracies are going through challenging and turbulent time right now, and probably the need for civic education is essential globally, not just to the countries that you've mentioned. I will just add that, and you probably know that you just mentioned that one of the first initiatives at Maidan during the Revolution of Dignity in 2013, end of 2013, was this Open University of Maidan. These were just a series of kind of civic lections on the screen right on Maidan, where people were discussing all, these issues of why the Constitution is important, what democracy is, what is responsibility of a citizen. Then this initiative grew up into the open learning platform that now contains dozens and dozens of open courses available. And I believe that was one of the instruments that assisted to keep, this kind of a cohort of active people in Ukraine, in this kind of a consistent mood for the last decade, and something that also enforced, this I don't know, this move, in the first days of the full-scale invasion to go and protect their country. So thank you very much. And I believe we will have some time for discussion, and we'll hear your other important points, I believe. But now I would invite Professor Starowojt to continue our conversation and provide, Pani Irino, your lens, your optic as a Ukrainian of what we are going through at the moment and what it means for our society in the future. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, dear colleague. I've learned a lot, and I think you have given a very thick description of the context and situation in which the social and cultural processes in contemporary Ukraine actually unfolds, both in occupied territories, the still free territories, the gray zone, all these scales or all these gradations, which we now in a way have to acquire as common experience, to find way how to narrate this experience in order to share it. And I'm very thankful for pointing to the issue of adult education. I want to make a small stress, which is important for me, that after 2014 in Ukrainian society, there was a great demand for the education of adults. And another dimension of that was that the attitudes to education actually changed a lot in that respect, that it was not about teaching as about learning, acquiring knowledge, that the knowledge is not something ready-made which could be transferred or, I don't know, put down the pipe, but it's something which has to be acquired, and preferably in groups, because individually we could be mistaken or same in the bubble of our own subjectivity and idiosyncratic distortions. So actually, since 2014, it's not only the outer world who was learning about Ukraine, but these were also Ukrainians who were learning about contemporary Ukrainian society and its state of affairs. The second dimension I want to address immediately is that I strongly support this view, which Professor Fennon was trying to convey, that people are semiotic creatures. We need to make sense of our experiences, of what we are going through. And of course, empire and the violent power always want us to keep silent, to be isolated, and to feel left behind and left alone. And I think that nevertheless, the key word of solidarity is not coined so often and so much because it's already somehow reserved for Polish civic society movement of late 1970s, early 1980s. Again, very risky, very dangerous movement, but very massive and important for Polish transformation into democracy. Nevertheless, it was first crushed, but later it resurrected with a new power. And we have all this important wave of velvet revolutions of 1989, including the fall of the Berlin Wall. But I think that in contemporary Ukrainian society, we insist that our experience is universal. It's not only something which could be described as local or marginal, let's say. This is something of a quality which we would like to share with the rest of the world, actually, because Ukraine provides a lot of experience to the world in political and civic subjectivity and agency. And I will try to reach out to 3 different examples because I think that explanation by an example is still important and relevant here. But what I would like to do is to say that one of the most important things to understand that cultural life and social life does not take place in any vacuum. It always context ridden, and context with which Ukrainian society was dealing was post-Soviet context, very often misleading and misunderstood because, for example, it was not possible still to talk about post-Soviet space after 2014, in my understanding, because, for example, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, and Russia had, Moldova and Uzbekistan had already very, very little in common. But of course, we all had that same background. The question was about our agency. What we have been able to do with this heritage, a very often deformed and negative heritage. And I want to make sure that we all understand that this same optics, that actually collectivity and public things and political or engagement of culture, for example, was tainted with the Soviet heritage very heavily in a negative way. That it was not easy back in 1990s or even at the beginning of the millennium in post-Soviet republics to create this civic stanza and civic education projects because mainly people just didn't want to participate. They were thinking that they are small and they have their individual lives, and for many generations they were deprived of fulfilling their dreams. Now the world is open. Why not to live a nice and a happy life? Why not to take advantage of being just alone and on your own? This is what freedom is actually about. And it has taken 2 revolutions and 1 war that Ukrainians actually realized that individually they are more vulnerable than ever, and that actually they want to be together, they like to be together, that there is such a thing like toloka in Ukrainian cultural tradition, when we do things together voluntarily, but to a great common good and to a great affect. So my 3 examples will come from contemporary situation. One, I will draw on an ongoing project which I do with my colleagues on a small scale at our chair in cultural studies. And this is project on community building during the big war, what has happened in the cultural sector, which was very heavily blown down, very heavily targeted by the first days and weeks of the big war, because the question was, are we still relevant? Well, people of culture, cultural practitioners, are we still relevant? What can we do about all this? It's overwhelming. And well, we need first aid workers. We need soldiers and officers. We need people who can be in trenches or the second line of the war. Who are we? The second case will be this very important book I want to introduce you to, which is called a Ukrainian Dictionary of War. And it has been prepared and edited by a colleague of mine, but I was very much involved in this project and I wanted it to happen. And I want to present it as a case. And the third level I would like to address as an instance, as a case for our today's discussion, will be our Ukrainian pen initiative, which is called Nezlamni Biblioteki, Unbroken Libraries. Just, I want to say immediately that I don't believe in Ukrainian unbrokenness. It's too big a metaphor, of course. We all are broken in this or that way. But what is important here is that people go on, nevertheless they are broken. So in this way, we are unbroken. I would like to somehow support our thinking and this idea which traces back to Frantz Fanon about grassroots vigilance. And I would like to try to think that Ukrainian society, which was quite hierarchical at the beginning of independence of 1991, actually has been more and more moving into the direction where nobody is watching from below. When in this post-colonial framework, we have been trying to do gestures of self-decolonization. And because of that, horizontal networks and societies and communities which were self-reflective and self-aware were actually quite powerful to partake into the reinstallment, reforming, if you wish, of Ukrainian state, not only Ukrainian private initiatives and some cultural and social trends, but also to contribute to the better state, and in this respect also to be not only responsible citizens, but also co-authors of the Ukraine of the future. So my first and very important argument will be that people of culture who were, for example, in cultural NGOs, in theaters, in libraries, in some particular societies, in the first weeks of the big war, they stated in interviews which we had, we have recorded more than 40 hours of these in-depth interviews, we all shared the same anxiety that culture will be not relevant anymore, that there will be no theater, no literature, no books, no dances, there will be no attitude that we together are co-creating our culture, authors and public, on the equal footing. And the most important thing they were asking themselves, it was not what the war can do to us, but what we can do to war, with war. How can we withstand it? And I think the major trend in discussions and in practice was against dehumanization. Because this stanza of Homo homini lupus est, it was in the air in the first hours and days of the big war. My city of Lviv, which is, I think, 800,000 city dwellers now, it was exposed to 1 million of refugees, which were just appearing in Lviv within a couple of weeks. So there were more refugees than local dwellers, but nobody was left behind. Everybody had a shelter, everybody have been warmed and fed and clothed, and people, many of them were transferred further west, and those people of cultural institutions, they were just volunteering in all these rescue operations. Later, when the situation settled somehow, there was another question, and it was really important, because we people of culture have some kind of ability to articulate experience firsthand and to help people also to tell their own stories. So not only writers or playwrights or scenarists, but also ordinary people to tell their own stories. Articulation of experience is part of the healing, but at the same time, it's part of understanding what you have been through. And this is really important because this disorientation and chaos and havoc of the war is very damaging psychologically and socially. So a lot of old ties, a lot of old communities were just shaken up and they were no more. Like, I don't know, it's heartbreaking to say that, but society of Mariupol, community of Mariupol is no more. It is spread over continents in many, many countries. But people who were related, for example, to little Avdiivka, in between Donetsk and Mariupol, they have started to gather together whenever they are on the planet Earth, and they were doing a kind of a ritual cooking together, which was called Avdiivska kasha. So it is not some very celebrated dish. Maybe in many families it was not known, but at least there was such a dish, which was both for the good occasions and bad occasions, like it was a ritual food for the reception after the funeral, but it was also done on weddings and on big celebrations. So this Avdiivska kasha gathered people not exactly around the stove or around the table, but it provided a space, a safe space and possibility to share the stories. And this is exactly what I have been told by the director of Gem Factory, a huge and important art institution of Lviv. She said, when we were functioning as a shelter for refugees from different parts of the country, we understood two things. Half of them are artists, another half is not. And it would be good to open up them to the possibility that actually arts is created by anybody now. It's not some very elevated professional level of training which should be involved. It could be community art, first of all. And the second thing is that we, for the first time in history, in recent history, are all together under one roof. People from east and west, south and north of Ukraine, central Ukraine, we are equally vulnerable. What can we do together? How can we just get along with each other? How can we know each other better? And I think that was a very important question, which they immediately filled with the Forum Theater, with all kind of workshops, with things when they were taking care about children and playing with children together. So this very soft and slow involvement into doing things together was a mean how to redefine our togetherness. If we have any future together, we have to have a way to get along now about all this. And this dimension with the vocabulary of a Ukrainian dictionary of war. What I am highlighting in principle as a very important gesture, which was not present in the previous decades. Ostap Slavinsky initiated small talks with refugees. And they were trying to convey their shattered experience and their shattered identity with some small keywords, words which have changed their meaning, or words which now, for example, are very important to them, some memories from the home which probably is no more, and so on and so forth. But what is important here, Ostap and his collaborators, they accumulated over 100 of small stories. And easily, each of these collaborators, who all are writers or cultural practitioners of other kind, they could make poetry of that. And they could make a collective anthology, and they could get very big literary praise and translations and whatever. But they did not. They stopped on the verge. They were humble enough not to impose themselves and their literary skills on these narratives. They wanted to be helpful to these people, and people actually asked for a kind of anonymity. So their names, the first names are used, but their surnames does not appear in the book. On the other side appears their location of origin, their place of origin. So because of these attitudes, their names sound like, I don't know, medieval princes and counts, Anna of Vyshgorod or Yuri of Kiev, and so on and so forth. And these small stories, they are really, really penetrating. And I think what is important here, that we got a kind of a collective mosaic of the experiences at once. It's not just one story or just a couple of dimensions, it's a big one. So let me just quote myself from the afterwards. What might be done here? What kind of response does the creative community have to collective suffering that cannot be prevented and unfolds into the unknown in an exponential progression of evil? A significant number of the excerpts that make up a Ukrainian dictionary of war come from conversations that took place at the Lviv railway station on the Polish-Ukrainian border, in hospitals and in temporary shelters for the displaced. A survivor of the First and Second World War, born in Lviv and a poet of the 20th century, Leopold Staff, wrote the now famous poem, The Bridge, which ends with the lines, "I didn't believe that I would cross that bridge, and now that I'm standing on the other side, and I don't believe I crossed it." Born in Lviv and a poet of the 21st century, Ostap Slavinsky, dumbstruck from the invasion and war, set himself the task of extracting from the new reality around him a small set of words. The idea was to speak about more than pain alone. He tried to give people the chance to talk things through, to ease the burden of their discordant reality, to help locate and retain their first memories in the subconscious amid this new confusion, and to illuminate these findings with new awareness. The problem, however, is that neither the speakers, their interviewers, the compiler of this book, its Ukrainian readers, nor the good people of the world in solidarity with us, no one is on the other shore yet. We are all still on this teetering bridge spanning the muddy river of history, which ragefully overflows and floods the land. Until 2014, I considered my generation and the two preceding as fortunate. Our era had seen less war than the generation of our parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents. But history corrected my optimism. Now, in independent Ukraine, there is not a single generation that was born, lived, and died in peace. And because of that, I want also to address my recent travels to the, let's say, close to the front zones, to these small libraries, local libraries in towns and cities, in villages also, which were destroyed or which were under occupation. So their collections of books actually are gone, or at least partially gone, but they still function as libraries. And when we were talking with local peoples and with librarians in these libraries, we were bringing books. Also, we have a great donation initiative when people from abroad and also from Ukraine just share their books, and we spread them around, which helps a lot, of course, in this situation. But our question was, do you really need books now? Do you really need library now? What is it all about? Of course, we are bringing electric generators and some humanitarian aid and some medical aid to the places, but we also bring books, and we bring writers and journalists. And local people were saying to me, like a young guy in the village of Savinci, who has been occupied for half a year back in 2022. He said, you know, it's so important for us just to get together. Library is a third place, is a third space. It's not home exactly, but it's not working space. And this is where we can gather together and think about our common future. We are quarreling here. It's not only that everything is very smooth and softly going, but at least we have our alternative scenarios for the future, and we have, just listen to me, 110 ongoing projects how our community should be improved. I don't know whether in Lviv City Hall we have 110 projects about that. And this guy of about 20 years old, to my question, what they will be rebuilding first, how they will go about when the war is over, he said, you know, I don't know exactly what we will rebuild first. As of now, we are building underground school here in order to gather children from 5 neighboring villages and to have them learning face-to-face, because they were learning online for almost 5 years, 2 years of pandemic and then 3 years of war. But he said, you know what? We will rebuild Ukraine as we wish, as to our likeness. Nobody knows exactly what it will be, but it's a privilege of our generation. We suffered a lot. Ukraine is part of our very internal understanding who we are and where do we belong. We were about to lose it, and because of that, we appreciate, we cherish it much more than before. And it's very good that we are not inheriting something which is already solid and unmovable. We inherit country which is in a way younger than us, and it needs us, and we want to be helpful. And around the city of Kharkiv, you will see slogans which are very interesting slogans saying "Пишаюся, лишаюся" or "Пишаюся, вертаюся." I am proud to be local and I come back, or I'm proud to be local and I remain, meaning Kharkiv and Kharkiv Oblast. And I ask these youngsters in Kharkiv, are you really so proud? Is it really your slogan? Does it comes from your own soul and heart? And they said, you know what? Maybe these people in the city hall, they really are of the previous generation because they think in the categories of pride. We don't think in these categories anymore, but we think that our land and our city needs us most. And they tell me a story about Kharkiv as a city in the bulletproof waste. They wanted to be a city in the bulletproof waste. And the bulletproof waste for the city is not the iron wall or a kind of a rift with water and crocodiles. This is most of all culture, and this is most of all civic society, they said. That they not only are Kharkivians, but they belong to networks, and they are very well networked society inside this city and inside Ukraine as well. And so many people outside of Kharkiv now are friends and visiting or even staying with them. My big acquaintance of this season was Catalonian journalist who came to Kharkiv to stay the whole winter because he knew this will be very dangerous winter, and he wanted to share the experience. And I think it's tell a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Pani Irina. Yes. Thank you very much. The first thank you is for all the initiatives that you launched, you participated in. It's a great inspiration. The second thank you is for mentioning the importance of learning, analyzing, understanding of Ukrainian experience, because there are so many things to really learn and appreciate, from either how to translate the activist movement into a large educational platform, or how to host people from another community in the number that is larger than your local community. And we never heard actually of any major conflicts for the last 3 years. And my third thank you goes to actually Professor Седмак now, because last year there was a Ukrainian Studies Hub that was launched in Notr-Dam University, and mainly it was the initiative of Professor Седмак. So, Pane Professor, do you also believe that the Ukrainian experience is important? The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good evening, good afternoon. I have 3 preliminary remarks and then 3 very simple points. The 3 simple points are called Sources of Resilience 1, Sources of Resilience 2, and Sources of Resilience 3. And then I have 2 concluding remarks. That's all simple enough. My preliminary remarks are, number 1, as Oksana mentioned, we had this lovely conference in Notre-Dame the last few days. It was so inspiring to see our colleagues and friends enact hope by coming together. And I thought the whole community of the conference created hope by, number 1, creating reference points for hope. So we can always look back at the conference and say, do you remember how inspiring it was to listen to the stories of our Ukrainian friends? So that's a reference point that cannot be taken away from us. Secondly, it gave us reasons to hope. I mean, all these examples of Ukrainian courage and resilience and sacrifice, these are reasons to hope, because I say to myself, if you want to occupy Ukraine and control the country, and the citizens are not with the occupier, you cannot do that. You cannot send 250 million occupiers into the country to control the country, where you need 10 occupiers to control one Ukrainian. So these are just reasons to hope, because at some point the cost will just be too high for any occupying force. And thirdly, the conference really created a community of hope, and we want to stay in touch with those who participated. We want to create this, well, we have created this Ukrainian Studies Hub as something that brings us together and keeps bringing us together. So that's my first preliminary remark, the conference with the reference points, the reasons for hope, and the community of hope that was built. My second preliminary remark is integral human development, the development of the whole person, each person. And the whole person has a past dimension, a present dimension, a future dimension. So thinking about how to remember the past, how to live the present, and how to plan for the future is very much in the spirit of IHD. So thinking about sources of resilience and reshaping the country is very much an IHD topic. And third preliminary remark is there is such a huge injustice connected to resilience. Some people have to be resilient. They have no other chance, otherwise they will not survive. So the distribution of the pressures to be resilient is an uneven distribution. And the Ukrainians have to be resilient, and they are, but also they have no choice. So there is a deep injustice just in, yes, we can praise Ukraine, and we should, and we can praise Ukrainians, and we should, but it's this deep injustice of the pressure that comes with the resilience that is really imposed on our beloved Ukrainian friends. My first point, source of resilience 1, it's called imagining remembering. Imagining remembering. You all know the famous story of Viktor Frankl. He was in the concentration camp, and what gave him strength and hope was he was there in the concentration camp, and he decided to see himself in a well-lit lecture hall in Vienna, remembering what he was going through in this very moment. So he imagined his remembering. And I think that's a very simple but also very powerful idea also for collectives. Imagine how you remember once you will be in a different space. You may know Emanuel Ringelblum. He was a Polish Jew in the Warsaw Ghetto, and he started the Ringelblum archives, where he said, let's document what we experience. Everything, the essays of the school children, photographs, journal entries, invoices, just create an archive. And so I think if you try to imagine you're remembering, it gives you agency, and documenting what's happening right now in Ukraine is a huge expression of agency, and I think this gives us a lot of hope and resilience and reshaping the country. And I know a lot is happening. We heard a lot at the conference, documentation efforts, and just creating this archive, this basically war archive in the living moment. There are two challenges with that, and I will not go into that because I've already wasted 4 minutes, 14 seconds of my time. But one challenge is how to deal with tragic knowledge. Tragic knowledge means we know at the same time too little and too much. So when Oedipus killed his father and slept with his mother, afterwards he found out he knew too much. I mean, how can you live with that? And he knew too little because he didn't know what to do with that. And the knowledge we have about concentration camps, the knowledge we have about the Holodomor, the knowledge we have about Ukrainian tragedies in the past is tragic knowledge. It's too much for us to bear, and we know too little, meaning how can we move on? And that's an ongoing challenge which we see in Germany and Austria, how to remember the past. The second challenge with remembering is how to not dehumanize the enemy who was really behaving in a dehumanizing way. How do you remember in a non-dehumanizing way? And I leave it at there because it's not my place to even think about that, but that's a major challenge also from a ethics of remembering point of view. My second point, source of resilience 2, is called cultivating collective interiority. Cultivating collective interiority. Simone Weil, as you know, was charged with thinking about post-war France in British exile with the French exile government. And she didn't write the Constitution of France. She wrote the book, The Need for Roots. And she basically thought about the needs of the soul. So this is what she did. She thought about what do the inner lives of people need in a time of reconstruction. Volodymyr and I and others are working on a project on the moral biography in Ukraine. And we think about the moral infrastructure that is needed, or the ethical infrastructure, a term I stole from Volodymyr. Hi, Flotko. The moral infrastructure connects rules and habits, the climate and the sense of justice, and the role of institutions. And so think about what would help Ukraine reshape its future and rebuild the country is clearly a moral infrastructure, where you need rules, you need everyday habits, and I think it was very clear from the previous contributions. Tanya talked about that, Irina talked about that. We need habits in the everyday, otherwise democracy would not really be enacted. We need a climate and a sense of justice. So when Tanya talked about citizens and citizens' sense of justice-oriented citizens, that's what we need. And also justice-oriented institutions, especially the judicial system. And what we see in the United States these days is really, you know, a tragedy unfolding when it comes to the judicial system and the politicization thereof. However, we cannot stop at the moral infrastructure. We need to go beyond that. We need to go what I call the spiritual infrastructure. The spiritual infrastructure, which helps us see life from a non-material, even eschatological perspective, with a sense of the mystery, and a point of view that goes beyond prosperity ethics. You all know what prosperity gospel is. The idea is, you know, live according to the gospel and you will be wealthy, successful, healthy, and I don't know what. And the same you find sometimes in ethics. I mean, live ethical lives and then you will be, you know, successful economically and safe. And this is just not true. This is just not true. And many of the Ukrainian heroes lived, I mean, praiseworthy lives, and they died and they were killed. And their families were deeply disrupted by that. So the moral infrastructure may give us a motivation to act ethically, but in the long term, you need more than that, and that's what I call a spiritual infrastructure. My third point, I'm already at 8 minutes. Can I have 2 more?
Yes, please.
Okay. My third is source of resilience 3, shaping the open future. I'm here in Cyprus, for all places in the middle of nowhere, if I may add, for a workshop that Kardinal Pizzaballa is coordinating with Palestinians and Israelis. So Israelis and Palestinians are coming together to talk about basically the future. And one important aspect of that is the openness of the future. And as we know, it strengthens resilience if you can live comfortably with different types of scenarios. And what's even more disconcerting is Cardinal Pizzaballa said there are so many questions without a response, so many problems, and there will not be a solution. And so he does not expect the grand solution for the Holy Land. He does not expect that. And sometimes I worry about Ukraine waiting for the grand solution. And then, you know, some people in the White House think about the grand solution. It may not happen that way. And then the future is very open, and it's more piecemeal. It's more you know, improvised and small steps every day, and an openness where the questions will remain with us. So as I said, being willing to live with this open future strengthens resilience on a personal but also on a collective level. So having said this, I'm coming to my concluding points. So source of resilience 1, imagining, remembering. Source of resilience 2, cultivating collective interiority. And source of resilience 3, shaping the open future. My concluding remark number 1 is Jeremiah 29 is this beautiful letter to the people in exile in the Old Testament Hebrew Bible, where the author, it's credited to God, basically says, you're in exile, but don't wait for life to continue. This is the time to build homes, to plant your gardens, to have children. This is the time. Don't put your life on pause and on hold. And I see that very much in Ukraine these days, where you know, people are active, and we have heard from my colleagues Tanya and Rory and Irina these wonderful examples. And my last remark is in 1 Samuel 17 in the Hebrew Bible, you have this famous scene where David is about to fight Goliath, the giant, and King Saul gives him Saul's armor. And we can imagine this is the king's armor, which is huge and heavy. And David cannot walk in this armor because he's too small. And I sometimes use this image to say to myself, it's interesting that we can still read Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics with a lot of gain. If you read Aristotle's texts on science, you know, this is outdated, this is obsolete, this is just wrong. but the ethic questions are still there, which is interesting. Now with our technological methodologies, we have become giants in technology, but we are still dwarfs when it comes to ethics and morality. And what Ukrainians have to do, and there's no other option, and that's what you're already doing, and you have full respect for that, you have to be spiritual giants. You have to be spiritual giants. Ukrainians have to be spiritual giants, be able to walk in this huge armor, because the world as it is going right now will not give us a political satisfaction. It will not give us a moral satisfaction. And that's where I think it's really either you all are, become even more, which you already are, spiritual giants, or resilience and hope will be on very shaky grounds. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, dear Professor Седмак. I can from my side, I can assure you, I have never heard or observed in my life all people around me, friends, relatives, talking about living, having the life of today, doing things today, appreciating every day. That's something that we really do experience. It's a very new experience to be here and now and appreciate this moment. Thank you for your inspiring introductory notes. As all others, I always have a lot of questions, but at this moment, since we are unfortunately limited on time, I will open this floor for your questions, or maybe remarks or reflections, or maybe some thoughts or ideas that you had when you heard other speakers. Maybe there is something important that you believe we need to hear when we are thinking about the fundamentals of resilience of the society of the future. Do you have any comments, questions, or? Yes, please, Professor Fínnin.
Oksana, thank you very much. I'd like to thank my fellow speakers for wonderful contributions that have provoked such thought and reflection. I wanted to ask Tanya first about this quest to develop strategies for re-education in various parts of occupied Ukraine. I completely agree with you that we need to be really developing these strategies in sophisticated ways now. In fact, we should have been doing them for some time, and I know your work has been very much directed to that. I'm thinking very much about Crimea and the way in which consciousness itself has been militarized. So not only have people been brought into this space of Russian history, myth-making, but their very education has been a militarization of consciousness. How do we combat that militarization? What do we need to do to address that component that is really built on questions of violence that is epistemic as well as physical?
Yeah, thank you for this question, Professor Fínnin. So, of course, there is no scenario. The only we can hope for now to look to historic knowledge that we have, or some examples that could be in certain contexts helpful. And again, I'm going to German examples of Aufarbeitung der Vergangenheit, so coming to terms with the past, and to the famous Adorno's quotation, who said the only task on education is to prevent the second Auschwitz. And that's like the whole task of education is, as he formulated, humanization of the society. And about this humanization, Professor Седмак was talking also about humanization, the notion of I'm making out the word untouchability of human dignity. This is what the German Constitution is saying, came from the notion we need to develop mechanism. And the mechanism seems Professor Седмак, you said be open to uncertain future and make a piecemeal tactic, very Karl Popper one, to say we need probably to think about small steps that we can do. So Adorno spoke about debarbarization of the society as a cure. And when you speak about militarization of the whole sphere of being and of living that we witness now on Crimea, then the notion, the term of debarbarization would be a general term that needs to be translated into the concrete steps. And this politics of debarbarization can start with dialogues, as Professor Starowojt was talking about. Let us talk about our experience. Let us see what's behind this experience. Let us talk about the perspectives of oppressors and oppressed. So that's what you were talking about, Professor Finn, in terms of also the whole Fanon and colonization story. Let us talk about that the being oppressor doesn't mean that we have a humane society. Only when we liberate ourselves and the oppressors, that the only way to have a kind of humane or humanized world. So what I want to say with this, to be brief, we have big terms and big ideas, and the big term would be debarbarization, if I may use Adorno. But we will need to be able to translate these big terms in the concrete action and probably do the kind of piecemeal tactics, but not concentrate only on children. We need to have the society as a whole, adults, also in our view. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Professor, yes.
Can I
yes,
ask a question
actually.
for Irina? There are all these pressures on humanities these days. You know, you're not really relevant, and it's all decided either in law or in economics, and maybe a little bit in political science. And your testimonies were so touching about the need for books and the need for libraries and the need for culture. Not only culture as a community building exercise, which is also it is as well, but also as a humanizing element. And can you help us make arguments for the increasingly important role of humanities in a crisis situation of a society?
Yes, I will follow your example, and I will give three small arguments, three dots, bullet dots in possible directions of further thinking. First will be about the uncontrollability of the world. We have entered a phase when not only in Ukraine or Eastern Europe, not only in Gaza and Israel, but in many, many places around the world, we are faced with uncontrollability of the world. And it exactly touches upon this distinction between risk-taking and uncertainty-taking. Risk when you know what will come out, you know the negative possible consequences. But uncertainty is when you even don't imagine what can happen next and the consequences which should be under your scrutiny. So I think that humanities prepare us best to the uncontrollability. And for example, science is not very often helpful here because science is more schematical and goes according to the existing and functional models of knowledge and epistemic frameworks and everything. Another dimension of this would be that humanities, they are not governed by time, not crushed by time, and they are invented against the time, if I may say. So it's not necessarily that they are immediately eternal, but they have some quality which could be revisited over and over. For example, my students now are most interested in Stoicism, in philosophy of Stoicism, because they understand that they are inborn Stoics because of their family stories of 20th century, but also they are learned Stoics of the 21st century, and they just want to relate and to compare and to give to be equipped in some better clues to the situation they are going through and how they should think and act upon it. And the third argument will be very private. This comes from the conversation with my very big friend and great Ukrainian poet of today, Mariana Kianovska. When I asked her once, how does he define her role now in society, in culture? What is she about? Very often she is attacked exactly because she is too sensitive to Russian pain in this war, and she is trying to point our attention that the enemy actually still is human. And she said to me, I have a feeling, I have своїм відчуттям істини допомагати іншим, to help others with to aid others with my own sense of what is truth. And I think this is something, again, it maybe sounds a little bit pompous, but it's so existential now in Ukraine that we have to have a sense of truth, we have to spread it around, we have to be prepared to very complex and entangled truth, but we have to share this with each other and have to be, I think that the idea of open future actually comes out of this idea of sharing the sense of truth, which could be very contradictory as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. If I may add, well, the whole global politics now proves the importance of humanity and how global decisions are made. Are there any final comments, ideas? Professor Finn? Yes, please.
First of all, I'd like to say to Irina, what a wonderful answer to Clement's question. I was hoping to ask Clemens actually about the burden of tragic knowledge from a different perspective, and that is from the perspective of the West, so-called, which is a problematic term. But in many ways, I see the failure among many different audiences in the West to accept that Russia's war of aggression has genocidal intent is in many respects a failure to take on board this tragic knowledge of genocide. We ignore the term, we ignore stories about tremendous violence and aggression in the West these days, particularly 3 years after the full-scale invasion. So I'm wondering about the implications of this tragic knowledge among policymakers and whether that, you think, is a factor at all in some of our inability to support and defend Ukraine in the ways that we could have.
Thank you so much, Rorry. Just a few simple thoughts. Tragic knowledge, in order to be tragic, really has to be both. It has to be knowledge, so people have to own it in a certain way, and they have to own it as knowledge where we don't know enough and too little at the same time. One Palestinian mentioned today that many Palestinians didn't believe the October 7th atrocities, or they didn't see that the extent of the violence and the atrocity, because the Palestinian media would report in a very different way than the Israeli media, and of course then also vice versa. So there's also a matter of access to the tragedy, to the tragedies that happen. And one of the scenes of this terrible meeting in the White House between Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky was President Zelensky wanted to show Trump, I mean, pictures just from these are war crimes. This is evidence of war crimes. And Trump was not willing or ready, whatever, to see that. And so there is this sense of it's part of growing up to be able to see the tragic and the evil as tragic and evil. I don't know why it is so important. I mean, on a certain level, I know. On another level, I'm not sure that it's so important whether we call something genocide or not. We have one person here who is really living in Gaza. And he said, I don't mind whether you call this genocide or not. Let me just describe to you what I experienced, or go to Gaza, see for yourself, and then describe what you see. Just use the normal, ordinary language terms to describe what you see. And then I don't worry about Raphael Lemkin, whether we should use the word or not. And that's a little bit where I'm coming from. But I do believe we try to domesticate the knowledge. Even if we in Austria realized it was real, Holocaust existed, and concentration camps existed, We try to domesticate it and own it. We have monuments, we have archives, we have guided tours through the concentration camps. We have, anniversary days where we commemorate that, and that's a way of controlling that knowledge. And so there's a double challenge here. Number one, recognizing the tragic knowledge as tragic knowledge, and then maybe people are not willing to do that. And secondly, if we know it, then not domesticate it, not tame it, and at the same time, wrestle it. And my last comment is, Christian Meyer is a very well-known German historian, and he wrote a book about after Auschwitz, and he said, I'm a historian, so when I deal with Auschwitz, I do it with the historical methods of a normal historian who asks certain questions, uses certain tools. But I have to remember, and he calls this the moment of being shocked again and again, this really happened. This really happened. And I think that's something which is also a sign of, if you wish, spiritual maturity. So also those who need to deal with that have to be spiritual giants on some level. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pani Irino, yes, please.
Can I have just a small final remark, because I think I have something to wrap up our discussion in a good way. I think we have coined the word tragedy, and we haven't tackled it enough. We haven't approached it from a little bit other possible perspectives. So being Ukrainian, I understand I'm subjective and I'm traumatized and so on and so forth. But my idea from the very first weeks of the full-scale invasion was that Ukrainians actually rejected the framework of tragedy. And it was not easy to tackle what we are transforming into instead. And within a year or so, I have come to the conclusion that we have transformed possible tragedy into the epic. What does it mean? Tragedy is irreversible. It's when everything happened and then all went absolutely tragically wrong. But epic is when it is 100, maybe 9900% that it could turn into the tragedy. But we still try to withstand and to do something about it. And I think that I have now a huge internal conflict, morally and epistemologically, with Svetlana Alexievich and her oeuvre. Because I understood that what Alexievich actually have done in her 4 or 5 volume documentary noveling of the atrocities of the Soviet power and excesses of power in the 20th century, she always treats this excess of power and this violence as a natural cause. Nobody is talking about perpetrators. Nobody is talking about justice to be somehow retrospectively achieved. It's always about sharing stories in the most private manner, but in the mode that we can do nothing about them. It just happened. And in this way, yes, the oeuvre of Alexievich is tragic, but the common history of contemporary Ukrainians, it is not entirely tragic, it's tragedy into epic, because we are trying to be those who withstand, who do something about it. And I will recall my very good colleague and my dear friend, Maxim Butkevich, who spent more than 2 years in Russian captivity as a peacenik who went to war on the February 24, 2022. He was a human rights activist. He was rather an anarchist by his ideology, but he did what he did. And when in captivity, when in all these atrocious situations, when there was so much violence inflicted, and he actually could do almost nothing about it to save his friends and colleagues, to save himself, he was saying, I thought my huge question will be, where is God? Because he is a believer, a man of faith. But he said, my real big question was, what can I do in the given circumstances? And I think for Ukrainians, it's a crucial transfer. They are not blaming any superpowers or powers. They are not looking for somebody who will be, I don't know, that the responsibility could be transferred to. Active citizens of Ukraine are active in this way that they just address the magic question to themselves. And the common wisdom, the folkloric wisdom I have inherited from my home was я зробила все, що можу, найся діє воля Божа. I have done everything I can, and now it's in hands of God to take care of that. And this first part is very important, whether I really done everything which is possible. And I think that our allies across the world now, and those who are interested in Ukrainian case as a moral stanza, also have to direct this question to themselves, whether they did really everything which is possible under given circumstances.
Thank you very much. Pani Irino, thank you so much for fantastic wrapping up of this wonderful conversation. And I thank each speaker for insightful thoughts, for your openness. And when we are talking about sources of resilience and aspiration, the network of friends and support and openness and activities within this network of friends is a source of our resilience and aspiration. And I do appreciate much all you do, and thank you for being with us. Thank you for this conversation. Thank you,
Thank
Professor.
you so much. God bless. God bless. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And we will continue tomorrow with other panels within this conference. So we hopefully meet you at our other conversations. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Дякую вам, пані Оксано. Дякую.
Дякую.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much.
Дуже тішуся, що могла долучитися. Thank you so much
Дякую.
for having me.
Дякую.
Дякуємо.
Szkoda, że